The Paris Affair. The bells of Saint-Germain tolled 8 as Isabelle Laurent pushed open the heavy doors of the Louvre, her breath forming faint clouds in the crisp morning air. The marble floors still gleamed with dew tracked in from the courtyards, the great halls still empty of tourists and chatter. This was her favorite hour, when the museum belonged not to the world, but to its keepers, to those who dusted and polished and restored, who listened to the paintings breathe in silence. Isabelle carried her leather case of tools tucked beneath her arm, her other hand brushing a stray curl back beneath her scarf. At 27, she had grown used to blending into shadows, to working quietly behind the grand canvases that drew gasps from visitors. Her task was never to dazzle but to preserve, to coax life back into colors dulled by centuries, to mend cracks invisible to those who rushed past. It was steady, delicate work, the kind that suited her. Yet sometimes, when she lingered too long before a painting, she imagined the figures stepping down from their frames, whispering secrets only she could hear. Paris was alive with noise and brilliance, but in the galleries Isabelle found her own rhythm, brush strokes, silence, breath. She was bent over a panel that morning, retouching a gilded edge with the lightest hand, when she heard the echo of shoes across the gallery floor. They were not the measured steps of her colleagues, but a quicker pace, sure and uninvited. Isabelle straightened, frowning. The man who approached carried the kind of presence that belonged more to Montmartre's cafes than the hushed halls of the Louvre. His coat was rumpled, his hat tilted carelessly, a notebook poking from his pocket. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, his nose a touch too sharp, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but his eyes burned with quick light, as though they missed nothing. "Mademoiselle Laurent?" he asked, his voice smooth, touched with amusement. "Yes." Isabelle set down her brush carefully, wary. "And you are?" "Julian Marchand, journalist." He tipped his hat slightly, though his grin carried more charm than formality. "Forgive the intrusion. I'm chasing a story, and your name was whispered as someone who knows more than most about the paintings here." She stiffened. "I restore art, monsieur. I do not make stories of it." "Ah," he said, circling the easel, his gaze skimming the half-repaired frame. "But sometimes the paintings make stories of themselves. Have you not heard? A theft in Montmartre. Whispers of forgeries slipping even into these halls." Isabelle's heart quickened. She had heard the rumors, of course. Quiet talk among restorers, speculation over a missing canvas whose absence had been hushed too quickly. But such matters were not for her voice. "I have work to do," she said firmly, turning back to her brush. Julian studied her a moment longer, then smiled faintly. "Work can wait, mademoiselle. Life does not." She ignored him, dipping her brush in the gilt solution, yet her hand trembled slightly, as if the room had shifted. That evening, walking home along the Seine, Isabelle found herself replaying his words. Life does not wait. Paris itself seemed to echo them, the cafes spilling laughter, jazz drifting from cellar clubs, couples twirling under lamplight. She lived only blocks from Montparnasse, yet she had never dared cross its threshold. Her life was measured in pigments and solvents, not in champagne and song. The following week, Julian appeared again, leaning casually in the doorway of her gallery. "Still hiding among the saints and cherubs?" he teased. She set down her brush with a sigh. "What do you want, Monsieur Marchand?" "Call me Julian," he said easily. "And what I want is simple. To invite you to dinner. There's a café near Montmartre where the music is finer than any museum silence. Come, one evening, see the city you live in." Isabelle shook her head quickly. "I do not dine with men I do not know." "Then know me," Julian said, his grin infuriatingly warm. "One meal. If you hate me, you may return to your angels and I will never bother you again." Against her better judgment, against the voice that urged her to refuse, Isabelle found herself agreeing. The café was alive with brass and smoke, couples pressed close, waiters weaving through with bottles of red wine. Isabelle sat stiff at first, her gloves folded neatly in her lap, until Julian leaned across the table and said, "Breathe, mademoiselle. Paris is not the Louvre." She laughed despite herself, tension loosening. Over wine and stew, Julian spoke of stories he chased, politicians caught in scandal, artists painting brilliance in garrets, musicians who poured their souls into notes. His words painted pictures more vivid than any she had seen. And when she spoke of her work, he listened, truly listened, as though brushstrokes mattered as much as headlines. Later, as a trumpet solo soared, he leaned closer. "You belong here, Isabelle. Not hidden in shadows. You belong in light." Her breath caught, though she looked away quickly. "I belong where I can be useful." "You mistake usefulness for living," he murmured. His words lingered long after she returned home. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the music still thrumming in her bones. Days passed. She returned to her work, her brushes, her silence. But Julian returned too. He appeared at the Louvre with coffee, with notebooks, with questions that made her laugh despite herself. Slowly, against her will, the walls she had built began to crack. And then, one evening, he came not with charm, but with urgency. His eyes burned sharper than before, his voice low. "Isabelle, there is truth in the rumors. A theft has happened. A painting stolen, replaced with a copy so fine even the curators are blind to it. I need your help. You see details no one else does. Without you, the story stays buried." Her stomach tightened. "You ask me to risk my position, to betray the Louvre. I ask you to reveal the truth," he said, his hand brushing hers on the table. "And perhaps, to step into a life bigger than you have allowed yourself." She should have refused. She should have turned him away. But his touch lingered, his voice pulled, and for the first time, she wondered if perhaps she could be more than a silent restorer. That night, walking back along the Seine, she paused at Pont-Neuf. The lamps glowed on the water, the city alive around her, and behind her, she heard footsteps. She turned and froze. A man stood in the shadows, his coat collar high, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. He smiled faintly, though it held no warmth. "You should be careful, Mademoiselle Laurent," he said softly. "Paris is not kind to those who ask too many questions." Before she could answer, he melted back into the shadows. Isabelle's breath came quick. The city's laughter and music suddenly felt far away. And for the first time, she realized that Julian Marchand's world was not just charm and cafes. It was danger, sharp and real, and she was standing at its edge. The man's warning echoed in Isabelle's chest long after he disappeared into the night. Paris was not kind to those who asked too many questions. She had not asked any, yet already she felt the weight of danger pressing in, the dark edge of a story too large for her quiet life. She hurried home, her steps quick against the cobblestones, her breath clouding in the cold air. The next day, she tried to lose herself in her work. She bent over a Flemish triptych, brushing gold into cracks with steady hands. But her mind betrayed her, drifting to Julian's words, his hand brushing hers, the way he had said she belonged in light. And then the stranger's voice, colder still, urging her back into shadows. When Julian appeared at the gallery door, his hat in hand, she did not look up at once, but she felt his eyes on her, steady, waiting. "You saw him," Julian said quietly, more a statement than a question. Isabelle's brush trembled. She set it down carefully. "Who was he?" "A man who prefers his forgeries to remain hidden," Julian replied, stepping closer. "You should not walk alone at night, Isabelle." She looked up sharply. "You put me in danger." His gaze softened. "I never meant to. But danger has a way of finding truth, and those who chase it." She folded her arms, as though to shield herself. "Then perhaps I should leave truth to you, monsieur. My life is quiet, and I value it so." Julian's smile was faint, tinged with something heavier. "Do you? Or do you value safety, because you fear the cost of wanting more?" The words struck deeper than she wished. She turned away, her voice tight. "Go, Julian, please." But that night, lying awake, she thought not of safety, but of the way his music-filled words had stirred something she had buried long ago. Days passed. She avoided him at the museum, burying herself in frames and pigments. Yet Paris did not let her hide. One evening, as she left the Louvre, she saw a man hurriedly covering a crate in the courtyard, his movements too cautious, too guilty. And for an instant, she saw it, the corner of a canvas, edges too fresh, brushstrokes too alive to be centuries old. Her heart hammered. She could not ignore it. The next morning, she found Julian in a cafe near Montmartre, his notebook open, his tie loose as always. His eyes lit when he saw her, but her voice cut quickly. "I saw it. A crate. A painting, not old, not true. They are here, Julian. The forgeries." He leaned closer, his voice low, urgent. "Then we can prove it. With your eye, with my pen. We can uncover what they bury." Her breath trembled. "And if we fail?" He smiled faintly, his hand brushing hers. "Then at least we failed together." That evening, they crept into the lower halls of the Louvre, the galleries quiet under moonlight. Isabelle's hands shook as she held the lantern, but Julian's presence steadied her. They found the storerooms, the crates lined like coffins, the air thick with dust. And there, beneath canvas covers, the truth. Paintings, perfect copies of masters, their brushstrokes too new, their varnish still breathing. Isabelle's chest tightened. "How many?" "Enough to shame the museum," Julian murmured, scribbling notes. "And enough to make men very rich." But before they could flee, footsteps echoed down the corridor. The stranger from Pont-Neuf stepped into the lantern light, his smile sharp, 2 other men at his side. "Curiosity," he said softly, "is a dangerous hunger." Julian moved in front of her, his stance protective. "And lies rot faster than truth." The man's smile faded. "You should have stayed in your shadows, Mademoiselle Laurent. The Louvre would never have missed you." Isabelle's breath came quick, but she did not retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "You think your forgery's invisible, but a restorer sees what others do not. Cracks, pigments, brushstrokes. I see them all, and I will speak of them." The man's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on his cane. "Then you will not leave these halls." Julian's hand gripped hers. "Run." They fled, footsteps pounding marble, lantern swinging. Shouts echoed behind them, shadows chasing, but they burst into the open air of the courtyard, the night wind slicing across their faces. Julian pulled her close, his voice ragged. "Go to the police tomorrow. With your word, they cannot deny it." Her chest burned. "And you?" "I will write," he said, fierce. "And I will not stop until the city knows." The following days blurred in chaos. Police stormed storerooms, officials blustered, papers roared with scandal. Julian's article printed first, his name bold on the front page. Isabelle read it twice, her heart swelling with pride and fear. Her testimony followed, her eye for detail unshakable. The men behind the forgeries vanished into cells or shadows. And Paris whispered of the journalist and the restorer who exposed lies in the Louvre, who risked silence and won. Through it all, Julian remained near. At first in crowded cafes, their words hushed, then in quiet walks along the Seine, his hand finding hers more surely each time. One evening, as jazz drifted from a cellar and the city glowed gold in lamplight, he stopped beneath Pont-Neuf. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly, leaving safety for danger. She looked at him, her heart full. "I regret only the years I spent in shadows." His breath caught. He cupped her face gently, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both promise and release. The city roared around them, but for Isabelle it fell to silence, to the warmth of his mouth, the strength of his arms, the sudden, undeniable truth of love. When they parted, she laughed softly, breathless. "What now, Julian Marchand?" He smiled, his eyes burning with mischief and devotion. "Now, we live in light, not shadows." And as they walked on, the sign glimmering beneath the stars, Isabel knew the Paris she had once feared now belonged to her, not because of safety, not because of shadows, but because she had chosen love, and with it, a life unafraid. Julian walked beside her, their steps unhurried, as though the city itself bent to their pace. The streets glowed with lantern light, music spilling from open windows, couples laughing in the distance. Paris had never seemed so alive to Isabel, and for the first time, she felt she belonged not as an onlooker, but as part of its pulse. They paused on a bridge overlooking the river, the sign carrying reflections of stars and street lamps like scattered jewels. Julian leaned on the stone railing, his shoulder brushing hers. "Do you know what I saw the first moment I walked into the gallery?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Another quiet restorer to ignore you." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I saw someone who had given herself to shadows. But shadows can be patient, Isabel. They wait until the right light enters, and then they bloom." His gaze turned tender. "You were never meant to hide." Her breath caught. She looked at him, at the journalist who had burst into her ordered world with charm and danger and laughter, who had made her heart stumble and soar all at once. "And you, Julian Marchand," she whispered, "were never meant to walk alone." His hand found hers, warm, steady. "Then let's promise each other this. No more shadows, no more silences. Whatever comes, scandal, risk, beauty, we face it together." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. He leaned closer, pressing a kiss to her lips, lingering as the bells of midnight tolled in the distance. And in that moment, with Paris humming around them, Isabel knew the affair she had begun was not merely with a man, nor even with love itself. It was with life, bright, daring, unafraid.